few years ago, I listened to the advice of a young man who lived in the same village as me about moving to the city to start my career. My first job was an assistant working on a construction site in a popular tourist area. I was also able to buy my family a new house in the city after a long period of hard working and savings. Since then, my life had changed as well, becoming better and better as the result of the curiosity and admiration of those around me. Actually, I understood why I was successful so quickly. It all started when I first started working on the construction site. My first days at work were always the most difficult compared to other people, lasting from early morning until very late at night. Working long days without rest exhausted me. A colleague recommended that I stay at the construction site with the other homeless workers to save money at the time. At night, I slept in the cramped dormitory right in the middle of the construction site where I worked, and I often stayed up until late at night because of sleeping in a strange place. I had a habit of going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, but the restroom was far away from the dorm. So whenever we needed to use the restroom, and especially at night, workers actually urinated right under the foot of the tree nearby the dorm. Our sleeping area was also surrounded by wild rocks, so no one else came around except for us. The other workers in the dormitory were all fast asleep at this point, but I was the only one who kept tossing and turning. I kept thinking about the strange thing I saw earlier. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. I was urinating under the tree at the time when I felt a strange cold blow on the back of my neck. Then I felt someone's hand slap on my back. I was startled, so I turned around to look behind me, but there was no one there. I was perplexed, thinking that a co-worker was pulling a prank on me. But even if I fooled myself, I wouldn't be able to stop worrying about what was happening to me. That cold hand rested on my shoulder again as I turned my back, along with the breath from behind. This time I immediately turned around to catch red-handed the teaser, but all I saw was a strange white smoke. That bright white smoke flew away as if it didn't want me to see it. I watched the smoke, saw it drift towards the forest behind me, and gradually the shape of a human appeared. I couldn't see the figure clearly, but I could tell it had a frightening face and glowing eyes. After that I turned away, attempting to finish quickly to return to my bed as soon as possible. I went straight to the dormitory after I finished, never looking back at the white shadow. But on my way into the dorm, I always had the distinct impression that someone was following behind me. I dashed into the dorm and slammed the door shut, not wanting the strange person behind me to come in. Finally, I rushed to the bed, letting go of the fear that I had been trying to suppress up until this point. But at that time I couldn't get my mind off the strange white shadow. The next morning I returned to the construction site to work, still thinking about the strange story that occurred to me. Our workers ate lunch at the construction site that afternoon, but because I was afraid of what happened the night before, I didn't dare to eat. Therefore, I wouldn't have to go to the toilet later. I decided to hide in the back of the dormitory, filling my stomach with a glass of water to satisfy my hunger so that I could work in the afternoon. Even so, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange figure I'd seen. I unintentionally glanced over, clearly seeing that this was where I met the white shadow at night, and I became intrigued. I quickly stood up and went into the bushes to check. The first thing that caught my eye when I walked in was a large mound of ground that looked like a grave. There were no inscriptions or incense around this tomb, only a simple incense bowl made of sand and soil. I knew there was something wrong, so I quickly left before I got into any trouble. Then I went to find my manager, who was also a long-term employee here. As soon as he saw me, he put down his unfinished business and came over to talk to me. He knew that I was a newcomer. He answered my questions enthusiastically, even when I inquired about the grave at the edge of the forest. He was surprised at first when he knew that I found the grave. He told me that when its construction was just getting started, the locals discovered an ancient coffin. When everyone saw this, they held a ceremony in which they asked permission to move the coffin to the edge of the forest, then bury it and worshipped it. When I learned about the incident, I became concerned and asked the manager where I could use the restroom without disturbing the deceased. The manager pointed to the back and said, The toilet is there and you can shower comfortably there. After that, the manager continued his business and never mentioned the coffin again. Since then, whether in the morning or in the evening, I'd walk a long way to use the restroom. We would have a weekend off and we were able to travel back to our hometown for a few days of vacation. I lived far away from home and I didn't have any friends or relatives nearby, so I decided to stay in the dormitory. The manager was in the same situation as me, so he stayed as well. I wanted to be close to him, so I went to the market to buy some food to cook some simple dishes. Then I asked the manager to join me for a few drinks the night. The manager enthusiastically agreed. We had a great time that night because we didn't have to worry about going to work the next day. After drinking until midnight, both of us wanted to go to the bathroom, so we asked each other to go together. I immediately went after him. He took me to the grave where I saw it the last time. At first I thought nothing strange would happen if I went with the manager, but after a while the manager burst out laughing next to me. His entire body trembled as if he had been poked, which perplexed me. I had a feeling something was up, so I took a look behind the manager. I clearly saw a hand on his shoulder at the time. The manager appeared to be aware of this, so he made some jokes with the person behind him. After that, both he and the strange spirit standing nearby laughed. I couldn't take my gaze away from them, and unexpectedly being seen by the spirit. The strange spirit changed the subject and approached me. I could feel the spirit standing behind me, staring at me but acting as if I didn't know that he was there. When the manager noticed my face changing color, he said, "Hey, you're drunk." Then he pointed to the dormitory and instructed me to follow him inside. As I walked, I gazed back at the spirit. I could clearly see that he not only did not leave, but also continued to look at me. I was afraid the spirit would follow me and the manager into the house, so in a panic, I dashed inside and slammed the door. When the manager noticed this, he was surprised and asked me what was wrong. I wasn't able to hold it anymore. I told him that I saw a ghost standing behind him. The manager stated that he knew it from the start. But because the spirit was a good person, he had no fear and regarded him as a friend. I was surprised and intrigued. The manager asked me to sit down and told me about the spirit. He recalled that the workers were not immune to this issue. Every time they worked, someone touched their back. The workers brought this to the contractor's attention, but the contractor did not believe them and threatened to fire them. This became a daily occurrence at the construction site over time, and it would not go away until the grave was established. The workers here also joked among themselves that the deceased might have been too lonely to tease them. It helped to calm my nerves after I listened to it, and he told me that the next time I go there, I should just say hello and worship, that nothing would happen to me. Then he told me that those who didn't harm the deceased would not face repercussions. As time passed, the project remained solely my responsibility. However, as the work was almost completed, the contractor discovered the coffin. When the contractor saw the wooden frame of the coffin, he realized it was expensive wood. So he took this piece of wood and sold it, and the corpse was temporarily buried in that land. However, after selling the coffin, the contractor began to experience bad luck. He frequently became ill to the point of death, and the money began to dwindle as well. Not only that, but he also saw a ghost standing behind him at night. The contractor had to sell all of his assets in order to find a magician who could cure him. Later on, I realized that the soul really just wanted to get to know me. Souls have no reason to harm us if we don't harm them. It was a mysterious story about the forbidden forest in my village. To develop the economy, the government had widened the road to facilitate traffic. The big road was opened, leading to the investment of many rich business owners. They came here to develop an ecotourism area. According to the project, cranes and workers were sent to work. They embarked on replanting the forest, cutting down all the trees to get vacant land. But when the cleanup was complete, the workers discovered a huge old tree standing tall, almost as high as a hill. This discovery made the whole group of workers worried. They decided to wait until the following morning to blow up the stump. While observing, a worker working in the delegation discovered a dark figure standing on top looking down. He didn't know how the mysterious man got to the top. The man slowly walked from the inside to the side of the hill. His face was gradually revealed wrinkled like an older man with dark black eyes, wearing the village's long-standing collar. The worker's gaze could not escape the figure of the mysterious older man, but the more the worker looked, the more curious he felt in his heart. The worker seemed to be hypnotized, standing there for several minutes. It was not until a colleague from afar came to call him that he woke up. He pointed to the top of the tree stump and told his colleagues about seeing the mysterious older man standing aloft in a trembling voice. But strangely enough, when they both looked up, the strange older man had disappeared, leaving no trace. This thing made his colleagues laugh at him. No one believed the young worker's story. That evening, the working workers returned to their tents to rest. They gathered in a large tent to light a fire and talk. The group of workers sat by the fire playing cards. After a game, the young worker suddenly became uncomfortable, so he went back to his bed first. After that, everything went on as if nothing happened. Only the worker that night suddenly had a cold, as if he was sick. By the middle of the night, the cold air and fog surrounded the small tent. Outside, the sky shot up with a fierce flash of lightning. With only a few lightning bolts, the sky poured down a force and rushing rain, drenching the surrounding land. Inside the tent, the young worker felt more uncomfortable, cold air on his toes running up his body. This thing caused his whole body to tremble with each convulsion. He turned around slightly, just in time to sound off the tent zipper sounding like someone who was coming in, and started calling his name. The whispering voice at the head of the bed made the young man unable to sleep. He opened his eyes a little to see what was going on. The worker looked dreamily towards the door, saw that it was bright outside. The rain and wind pulled into the cold tent. A dark shadow was slowly walking towards him. The young man couldn't make out the face of the person standing in front of the tent. He could only feel as if this person was wearing a form of traditional clothing and a hat that had been around for a long time. The older man walked like a fly, slowly entered the tent, and walked back to the front of the worker's bed. This thing caused the worker to panic and sat up. The appearance of the older man at this time also appeared in front of the young man. He was sure that he had seen a ghost. The eyes of the older man suddenly turned red with anger. He opened his mouth wide, shouting to chase these workers away. The worker heard every word this man said, so he nodded in agreement in panic. He kept saying that he would go now and begging his spirit to spare his life, then sat up, looking around with a panicked look in his eyes. His screams woke up other workers who were sleeping around. Everyone was surprised and asked him what was wrong. The worker at this time seemed to regain some consciousness, pointed out to the door of the tent, and recounted the dream he had met earlier. When his colleague heard about it, he remembered the incident in the afternoon and got angry, pulled the blanket and aggressively got out of the bed, forcing the worker to take him out to check. The two took a flashlight and went straight outside, grumbled, making everyone in the tent nervous. But after only a few minutes of searching with the searchlight, both workers also saw something strange that they should not have seen themselves. The strange phenomenon before their eyes made the two men feel anxious. They crept back into the tent to guard and observe. Both of the workers held flashlights and pointed forward where there was a bright yellow light, like fire, right at the base of the ancient tree in the afternoon. But when they looked closely, the old worker thought it was just an ordinary fire that was being magnified by being too close to the tent, causing the young worker to see it wrong. He turned to blame the young worker for not being careful, disturbing the sleep of other colleagues. But the young man didn't care, pointing forward. The colleague next to him saw this and looked in the direction of the hand. Both of them panicked when they saw that they had not been near any ancient trees until now, but this strange thing gave the workers here a bad premonition. The group woke up from the tent together, equipped with protective gear, and ran towards the direction of the ancient tree. Here they saw a bright yellow fire was burning fiercely, but as soon as the team reached the place, this fire was completely extinguished. In front of the group of workers also appeared a large cave. The workers followed the path leading to the bottom and were shocked to discover that 2 coffins had been placed here. The team was confused by what they had just found. Everyone was panicking and extremely worried because the team did not know how to deal with these 2 coffins. While the team was busy trying to find a solution, there was a loud sound from the tents, sounding like broken rock, very scary, making the whole team of workers look back in surprise. The incident happened in front of the workers' eyes as quickly as the blink of an eye. No one had time to move, they just stood still and watched the big rocks rolling down from above. The rocky hill behind the tents suddenly moved. The ground also trembled. There was also a crackling sound from the hillside and the sound of dust pouring down below. Huge rocks poured down below, pressing on the small tents. In the blink of an eye, rocks were able to level the ground. This thing was like a giant rock man, smashing the tents in front of him with his hands. Those who were present to witness a strange and scary event at that time could not keep their composure and also knew in their hearts that they had just made a big mistake that was difficult to repair. The team was seen to be dumbfounded by the wreckage right in front of them for a long time. But the young worker alone thought that this was also a blessing, because if they did not go out, they would also be crushed to death by these giant rocks. Looking at the crushed tents and the working tools of each worker, no one could help but feel pity. After regaining their spirits, the workers immediately discussed with each other, figuring out how to handle the messy things here. People were divided into groups to work. One group actively called the management report. Another group started going out to see if there were any tools left. The current situation made outsiders sigh because the working tools were no longer usable and they had to wait for support from the manager. The rest of the group in the cave checked the neck of the coffin. Everyone began to work together to open the coffin lid to check inside and discovered a set of remains. Based on the remains of the bones, this was the remains of a man buried here in the last century. In the place where the coffin was found, the workers also found a long-standing hat for the village officials. The hat on the ground surprised the young worker because it was the same hat that the older man he saw was wearing. Lately, I heard my grandmother recount that the place was formerly the burial place of old mandarins. Although many coffins had been excavated for a long time, there was still a coffin of the first official in the village inside. After this incident, the other group of construction workers all resigned because they were so scared. The project was also stopped. Later, historians also came and excavated the surviving ancient tomb and brought it to another place for proper burial. This story happened in a residential area west of Liaoning City 8 years ago. That year, after graduating from technical school, I was assigned by school to work at a mechanical processing factory. That factory had an agreement with our school that would pay little salary for fresh graduates like us. At that time, we were in the category of interns because we didn't know much, so we had to let them use us. However, during that time, I met some good friends. When we had a rest on Sunday, we would gather to play games and have dinner together. That same day, my colleague Xin and Fang would come to Fi's house to cook and drink together. Fi's parents were away for a few days so we could have fun. We just walked to Fi's house and chatted happily. As we approached the gate, an older man with white hair walked past us. We didn't pay much attention to the older man's ugly appearance, but the moment he passed us, I actually smelled a strong, rotten smell. The smell was so unpleasant that it made people nauseous. It was like the smell of an animal that had been dead for more than 10 days with maggots. We all frowned at the older man. At that time, I thought it was strange. The older man was well dressed and had a nice figure, but why was he so smelly? Fee lived in the same neighborhood as the older man, and they were very familiar. When I inquired about the older man, Fee introduced us. The older man's age was younger than his appearance, but why he became like that, no one knew. This incident would certainly make people curious. There was an incident in his family, that's why he was so strange, Fee said. It turned out that the man's wife fell ill and passed away. Currently he lived with his son, who was our age. Although the house would not be complete without his wife, the older man worked hard every day because he had a son. He wanted to give his son a good life. But he would never have thought that one day the worst thing in his life would happen. It was a robbery and murder case. Although the case was solved and the killer was severely punished, his only son was never resurrected. The man's life suddenly fell apart because his only motivation for living was gone. Since then, the man quit his job and didn't go out anymore. The older neighbors were very sorry for that man. However, about a month after the death of the older man's son, residents discovered something strange. One day, two people nearby passed by the door of the older man's house and said, "A good family disappeared in the blink of an eye. Poor thing." Suddenly, they noticed that there were a lot of pamphlets posted outside the door, covering most of the plastered wall and giving off a burning smell. This thing at least showed that the man had not been out for a long time. The people around smelled rotten, so everyone suspected something was wrong. At first, everyone said nothing, but over time the smell became more and more severe, making it impossible for people to sit still. A few aunts and uncles in the neighborhood committee reported to the police. However, the police knew the older man became like this because his son was killed. At the same time, they also discovered that the older man did not have suicidal tendencies. But that aunt and uncle still decided to report to the police. The policemen thought for a long time because this was really important. It was not easy to break into someone's house without a superior's order. Probably because he didn't go out for a long time and didn't take out the trash. That caused a stench, the police said. Seeing that the police did not believe him, an uncle stepped in front of the crowd and told a strange thing he had seen in the day before. When this uncle was walking one night, he saw a man throwing trash around. The uncle approached and saw that the man was the older man near the house. In just a few days, the hair of the older man turned grey. The uncle barely recognized him. When the uncle saw the older man, he wanted to say hello and comfort the older man with a few words. But the older man reacted strangely. He turned and left without saying any word. This made the uncle find it very strange. In the past, this older man was often very enthusiastic. When he met everyone, he greeted everyone. Even if his family had a bad situation, he was always warm. The uncle turned his head and saw that the trash bag the older man had just thrown was even more stranger than usual. There was still a lot of blood on the bulging black bag, and there was still the same rotting smell coming from the older man's house. Was there something shady here? The uncle was frightened, stepped forward and tore the black bag open, wanting to see what was inside. This uncle was surprised because there were some dead crows inside. Some had just died, some had rotted and gave off a stench. This story made the uncle want to break his head because he did not understand. The uncle wondered if this older man was doing something shady. After hearing what the uncle said, the two policemen felt strange and finally decided to go to the older man's house to check. The uncle and the neighbor led the two policemen to arrive at the older man's house. The door seemed to have not been opened for a long time. The stench was strong. The police also thought it was odd and reached out and knocked on the door. But no matter how they called, no one answered and no one opened the door. At this time, the police also felt that things were not easy. Maybe something happened. The two policemen discussed whether to ask someone to open the door. They needed to see how things were going. At this moment, the door suddenly opened with a cluck, 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 cluck. It was a man who opened the door. His hair was now white, but when the policeman saw him, everyone was surprised. There was a lot of blood on the farmer's body. The older man kept his head down and said nothing about the police interrogation. The police were afraid of something serious, so they quickly restrained him first. They asked the older man to stand still and not to move to make sure he couldn't do anything. That uncle and aunt's neighbor were both around the door at the time. They were amazed when they looked inside the house. Then some policemen ran over and checked the older man's house. In the kitchen, the policeman found a lot of crows with bloodstains all over the kitchen. There was also a crow being slaughtered in a basin of water, blood everywhere. The body of the man's dead son was not cremated or buried but lay flat in his bedroom. The situation at the scene was strange, so the older man was taken to the police station. After many questions from the police, the older man finally spoke. After the death of his son, he was sad for a while, but then he heard someone say that if he drank the crow's blood for 81 days, he could bring the dead back to life. The method sounded cruel and unscientific, but he was eager to give it a try. The older man cried as he told the story and kept begging the police to let him go because his son couldn't stop drinking blood for a day. After listening to the police, everyone was speechless because he loved his son so much and could do anything to hope for his son to come back to life. Because crows were not considered a protected animal and disposing of dead family members was not mandatory, the police released him. After hearing Fee recount that older man's story, my first reaction was to feel sorry for that man. However, Fee said that the people who entered the older man's house that day spread the rumor throughout the entire surrounding area. These people said that although his son had been dead for nearly 2 months, the body had not decomposed and the hair was still growing. As for whether the rumors were true or not, we didn't know either. Later, my family arranged for me to work in a factory in Jiangsu. I left my hometown. I didn't know if that older man's son would come back to life. Fee said that the older man suddenly moved out and no one knew where he went. This story occurred in Yongchun Village, Jidong Province, Jixi City, Heilongjiang Province. In the village, there was a gambler named Cao. Despite being in his 30s, he had no family because he was a gambler. That day, Cao went out early in the morning and his old blind mother knew he was gambling again, so she tried to advise her son to give up, find a soulmate, and then build a family in order to have a decent life. But he refused to be obedient to stay at home, instead rushing out the gate without even looking back, leaving the old mother sighing behind. After leaving the house, Cao went straight to Mr. Lee's house at the end of the village to the east, because Mr. Lee's family owned a gambling establishment in this village that was open all year round. As Cao approached Mr. Lee's front door, he became wary because there was a big man standing there, guarding the door for the casino. Despite his concerns, Cao gritted his teeth and approached him. He always looked down on Cao and had a hostile attitude whenever he saw Cao, because Cao craved to gamble while he even had no money. When he heard Cao said that he got rich, he didn't believe Cao because everyone knew Cao didn't have a job, his family was farmers, and he had no income at all. His predictions was correct, because Cao did not just come here to play cards, but rather to play cards with them. When Cao asked, "Isn't this a place where you make money?" he replied, "You are such a jerk. The pig that your mother worked so hard to raise, you even took it out as collateral." Nonetheless, he opened the door and let Cao in. Cao entered the room. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and the sound of gamblers arguing made the scene here very lively. When the people at the mahjong table saw Cao walk in, they all came to a halt, considering that Carl wasn't allowed to play because he didn't have any money. So, when they saw Carl, they all said empathically, "If you don't have money, get out as soon as possible, otherwise everyone here will teach you a lesson." Carl said he would bet with the family's fat pig. He was confident, his face was somewhat smug, and Carl sat down at the mahjong table. Zing was the man in charge of this bet. After hearing Carl, he immediately summoned Carl to another table to write a loan bill. Zing claimed that mortgaging the pig at home would allow him to borrow 1,000 won. That man did a lot of this kind of thing, and the loan bill was written quickly, urging Carl to sign it, then giving him 1,000 won. Carl signed and returned the bill to Zing. Zing glanced at it a few times, and when he saw no problems, he allowed Carl to come to the table and began gambling. They were playing mahjong, and it quickly became clear. The rules were simple. Everyone got 2 cards, and the winner was considered on the number of points they received. Carl lost a few games in a row and started to be nervous. Since his opponent Zing was constantly winning cards, Carl had no chance of knowing that the other 2 people at the table were also Zing's people. It would be strange if Carl won. After a few rounds, Carl's 1,000 won of selling his pig left him with only 400 won in his hand. The more he played, the more he lost. Carl continued to play until the afternoon, and the remaining 400 won were also lost. When Zing realized Carl had spent all of his money, he put his hand on Carl's shoulder and asked him to take his men home to catch the pig. Then it was the doorman's turn. Before leaving, Zing told him not to let Carl escape on the way. The guard nodded and pushed Carl out. He threatened Carl that if he tried to flee, he would cut off his legs and make him trudge home. "You deserve this because of being obsessed with the gambling," he said. When they arrived at the house gate, Carl refused to enter, instead telling them he would stand outside the gate and let them in to catch the pig. The doorman considered Carl's attitude and then agreed so as not to embarrass him. Carl looked at those men walking into the yard and quickly hid in the opposite corner. He didn't want to see his elderly mother sad. Hearing the screams of the doorman and the others in the yard, as well as his old mother's bitter pleas, he felt remorse and blamed himself. Finally, after witnessing those people beating the old mother and driving the pigs out, he couldn't return home and face the old mother again. Carl couldn't even remember how many times he vowed never to gamble again, but when he saw the blind old mother at home and thought about his behavior, he burst into tears. He dashed out of the village and came across a dilapidated house. He curled up in the wall's corner. It was getting dark by this time. Carl dozed off. Carl didn't know how long he'd been sleeping when he heard someone talking to him. A voice from behind a shattered wall asked him for fire to smoke. Carl dozed off. He didn't want to talk to that person. He said in a dream that he didn't smoke. Carl felt a chill as he turned to go back to sleep. The house was dilapidated and he was outside the village. It was late. How could anyone come here to lend him fire? Carl sensed that something was wrong when he heard voices outside the wall saying, "Let's go gambling." When these words were said, Carl suspected that this person was not normal. Before Carl could even raise his head to look, a figure appeared from beneath the crumbling wall. Carl was terrified when he looked at the man. The man's face was a large blood hole and he was getting close to Carl's face. Carl was so terrified that he peed his pants. His legs were weak. He wanted to run but couldn't get up. He could only sit on the ground panting for help, but couldn't speak. As the man stretched his head forward again, Carl noticed many sharp teeth emerging from the red hole on his face, which had no feature of a human face. He suggested gambling with Carl again. If Carl won, he would give him a large sum of money. If Carl lost, he would shave his face. A cold voice resounded, and Carl's heart was filled with fear. Carl was so terrified that he couldn't say no and could only nod his head in a cold sweat. When he saw Carl agree, he took out a few gold nuggets and placed them on the dirty wall, declaring that this was his bet. At the same time, he pulled out a mahjong set. After that, he placed the mahjong set on the filthy wall. Carl stared at the deck of cards in front of him, his heart racing, and he did not dare to reach out and take it for the first time. Following the drawing of the card, the man repeatedly urged Carl to draw the card quickly. Carl did not dare to resist, so he could only tremulously pull out his hand. Carl's body was shivering, holding 2 cards in his hand, but he didn't have the courage to look at them, so he just held them in his hand. The man appeared impatient, so he asked Carl to open the card. Despite his repeated urgings, Carl did not dare to open the cards and could only throw out 2 cards in his palm. When Carl closed his eyes and heard the man say that he got an earth card, he thought the game was over. He had never drawn a card larger than the ground card since he began playing this game. When Carl closed his eyes and covered his ears, he could hear the crunching sound of cards falling on the brick wall, similar to the sound of a life test. Immediately after Carl's card fell, he heard someone howl, "I really lost!" His words were filled with unbelievable tones, as if he couldn't lose. Carl reasoned that if his opponent lost a card, he would be ashamed to commit suicide, so he closed his eyes and waited for a long time, only hearing the wind whistling in his ears. Carl quietly opened his eyes, looked around and saw that the person had vanished. At this point, his heart seemed to be reviving. He thought he was having a dream, but when Carl turned around, he saw a deck of cards and some gold bars on the wall. Only then did he realize that the card he'd selected was the largest deck in mahjong, the Earth card. Carl couldn't hold back his tears as he realized God had saved his life and given him a second chance. Carl returned home with some gold nuggets. He never gambled again, sold the gold nuggets for startup capital, and Carl's family's life gradually improved. This was a story that I witnessed with my own eyes when I was 8 years old. That summer vacation my parents were busy with business, so I went back to my hometown to live with my grandmother. Grandma had a cousin who passed away. Because they were close acquaintances, my grandmother took me to the funeral. To get to her cousin's house we had to go by bus. Since she didn't go out of the village often, Grandma asked a person on the street where the bus stop was. Luckily, as soon as we got there, the bus had already arrived. The distance to the grandmother's cousin's house was quite long. After sitting on the bus for more than an hour, my grandmother and I finally arrived. Everyone prepared a lot of delicious food. I ate while listening to the adults talk about funerals. It seemed that Grandma's cousin passed away quite quickly. No one in the family would have expected that after just one sleep, they had to part with her. Their family had 2 older sons, so organizing the funeral was not difficult. Early the following morning, a group of people went to the cemetery to dig a grave. I was curious, so I asked my grandmother to come along. Their cemetery was on a low mountain outside the village. Each family in the countryside had its own cemetery. The deceased would be buried in the family cemetery. Entering the cemetery, the people with pickaxes and shovels began to dig. After watching for a while, I got bored, so I ran to the side to play. While I was reading the inscriptions engraved on the tombstone, suddenly I heard the murmur of people digging graves. I ran over excitedly, not knowing what happened. The grave diggers looked so worried. Everyone was bewildered when they saw the object lying at their feet. This was probably the first time they had encountered such a thing. When they dug to a depth of more than a meter, a large rock appeared on the ground and made it impossible for them to dig any further. Those gravediggers told the family that the rock underneath was too big to be dug out. The dead woman's husband heard this and frowned, but they couldn't do anything but find another location to dig a grave. However, one of the gravediggers told the family that it was bad luck to dig 2 graves. The older man was a little angry when he heard that. He angrily said that if the grave could not be dug, where would the dead be buried? The 2 people who were digging graves were a little confused but didn't know how to solve this, so they had to do as the older man said. After discussing it, the 2 of them dug another grave not far from the old one. A few days later, the funeral was conducted. Many people came to offer their condolences to their families. Everyone was sorry for the sudden passing of the older woman. After completing the rituals, the son held his mother's photo and went to the family cemetery for burial. Maybe because the family was busy, even the first grave dug did not have time to fill it up. My grandmother and I went home after her cousin's burial, but unexpectedly just 3 days later, the family continued to report the funeral. The one crying at the door was the eldest son of my grandmother's cousin. I met him a few times at the funeral a day ago. My grandma invited him to the house, poured him water, and asked him what was wrong, and I listened at the door. The eldest son of the family took a cup of water, choking on what happened after we left his house. His younger brother was Taru. Taru was a construction worker. After the funeral ended, he also rushed back to his work. That day, Taru was pushing a cement truck when the newly built wall suddenly collapsed in front of him. By the time Taru realized danger was approaching, it was already too late. The bricks were now falling towards him. The bricks then completely covered Taru's body. Many people working nearby heard the crash and rushed to run. However, when the other workers pulled Taru out of the pile of bricks, he became a pile of shredded meat. Blood splattered everywhere. According to local custom, 2 funerals could not be held consecutively within 100 days, so Taru's coffin was not brought home. The older brother had to bring Taru's coffin to his house, but before he could get through the door, his wife stopped him. The younger brother died. The mother also died. The wife's attitude was too harsh. The couple argued loudly about this. The wife firmly refused to leave Taru's coffin in the house for fear of bad luck, but the husband did not agree to leave his brother's coffin on the street. Taru's death was pitiful enough. The couple argued for a long time, and the wife finally agreed to let Taru's coffin inside the house, but only in the backyard. The eldest brother also had no other choice and had to ask someone to push the coffin into the backyard. Taru's coffin was placed next to a large cage. The older brother was sad, but there was nothing he could do. Just like that, the coffin was placed in the backyard to wait until the day it was buried. Even there was not a simple funeral for Taru. Early the following morning, the wife went to the backyard to feed the pigs as usual, unaware that something terrible was about to happen. Before she had time to go to the backyard, she saw the pigs suddenly rushing out. Did she forget to close the barn door yesterday? The wife thought for a while and was sure that she had closed and locked the barn door carefully yesterday. How could they get out? Fortunately, the pigs did not lose any. The wife didn't think much of it and quickly brought the pigs back to the barn. However, not knowing what happened after that, the wife looked very panicked, shouted, and dropped the bucket of pig bran on the ground. Her face suddenly darkened. A cold wind blew from nowhere, causing the wife to shiver involuntarily. It turned out that her pigs collided with the coffin after escaping from the barn, causing the coffin to overturn in the middle of the yard. Taru's body was now full of bite marks. The wife's screams made the husband in the house panic and run to the backyard to see his younger brother's body lying on the ground. He burst into tears and rushed forward. The husband was holding his brother's body sobbing, and his wife was looking very panicked over there. After turning over the younger brother's body, the husband asked his wife to quickly help him put the brother's body back into the coffin. However, the wife did not want to touch the corpse. The wife's attitude and the fact that she placed the coffin in the backyard made the husband extremely angry. The wife then did not even admit her fault and said extremely outrageous words that made the husband unable to control his anger. The eldest brother could not bear it anymore, turned his head and scolded his heartless wife. Then he waved his hand and slapped his wife in the face with a very painful slap. The wife was a gentle person, never touching anyone, but this time the wife was too much. The wife covered her face with her hands and said he was an abuser, but everyone knew that the husband was only driven by anger to act like that. After saying this, the wife turned away and asked for a divorce. She kept screaming to let the neighbors know that she was beaten by her husband. The wife went into the house to get dressed, went straight to the door without saying a word. It seemed that she was thinking about going back to her mother's house. While walking to the railway section, she ran into a neighbor. Seeing that her face was swollen from the slap, the neighbor asked her about it. The wife was angry and ignored the kind neighbor. The wife even cursed under her breath, saying that he was a talkative bastard. However, just when the wife was about to cross the track, the neighbor's face immediately panicked. He shouted and stretched his hand forward to prevent the other wife from crossing the railway tracks. It turned out that there was a train ahead. The train whistle was howling, but somehow the wife still didn't hear anything and walked across the tracks. And whatever comes would come. The wife was tragically killed by a passing train. In just a few short days, their family had to receive 3 tragic deaths in a row. It was really a rare thing. Their eldest son choked up and told his grandmother about the successive calamities that occurred at home and asked for my grandmother's help with the funeral. Because the relationship between the two families was good, my grandmother promised him that she would arrange the family and help them take care of the funeral. Taru was buried in a pre-dockside grave. As for the daughter-in-law, I thought it was the revenge of the younger brother. I have an uncle named Ben, who is my father's 3rd brother. The story I'm about to tell you is also related to him, a man who is extremely addicted to gambling. After losing his job, Uncle Ben couldn't find work. Every night he would go to the casino and try to make a living by this so-called profession. My aunt always tried to stop him, but she never could. In those days, she took care of everything alone. She took care of the whole family and 2 small children. My uncle just gambled. He played 10 times and lost 9 times. The family's assets were gone. There was a day when Uncle Ben didn't come home for 2 days. My aunt didn't go to look for him because that wasn't the first time. On the 3rd night, my uncle returned. My aunt guessed that he only came home because he lost all his money again. But this time, his face was proud. He took out more than 50 million from his pocket and gave it to her and said it was all for her. This proved that he won. He finally won. It was the first time my aunt saw this, and more importantly, my uncle promised never to lose again. He also proudly told her about how he won this game. Yesterday, he played mahjong with some people. He would first lose continuously. All his money was lost, everything, and the people in the casino would kick him out and wouldn't let him play anymore. But even though he begged for the casino to let him continue playing, he was still punished and banned. As he was standing in the hallway cursing, someone called his name from behind. The man told my uncle that maybe he should try praying to the god of fortune. Maybe then he would win. My uncle didn't show any interest in this. He did not believe in any god. He would sometimes consider praying to different gods, but no god ever helped him to win in gambling. The man continued to persuade my uncle, saying that ordinary begging would not be effective. This made my uncle a little curious. He needed to know where to pray to get this effect on him. The man offered to drive my uncle to the place where he could pray to that god. So the two of them went straight and deep into the forest. They crossed a large tree path to a small statue. The stone statue, placed neatly in the forest, was also covered with a red scarf on its head. The man showed my uncle how to pray. He needed to use his hair and nails as well as blood to make prayers work for this god. My uncle found it strange, but he still wanted to try it because he had nothing to lose. And after thinking about it, my uncle decided to pull out some of his hair. He took some hair, nails, as well as blood, and placed it in a bowl in front of the god statue as an offering. After that, he clasped his hands in prayers, and he would pray that he could win every bet he made. As soon as the prayer ended, the wind blew across the statue. That caused the veil to fly off. When the strong winds blew away the veil to reveal the statue's damaged and fierce face, my uncle became scared. He thought maybe he should not have prayed to this statue or altar at all. After leaving, he went back to the casino to borrow money from others to try his luck once again. True to the promise of the stranger and the prayer he made, he won every single bet he made. The amount of money earned was too much to handle. Once my uncle bet 10 times and won 9 times, no longer as unlucky as before. But every time he won, he would start feeling tired and he would start panting like he had just run 3 kilometers. He coughed for many days. My aunt advised him to stop gambling, but he still did not listen to her. Every time he came home from gambling, he would bring back a lot of money, which surprised her. But in terms of health, he was not as good as the night before. In just 2 weeks, my uncle lost weight, went from 80 kilograms to only 65. Seeing such an unusual transformation made my aunt worry. She cared about him a lot. She knew he was hiding something from her, but she couldn't convince him to tell her because he thought he had to earn a few billion more before he stopped. The next day, even though he was not feeling well, he still decided to continue to go to the casino to play. My uncle kept winning and winning, and he collected a lot of money. But in the 5th game, another player won. My uncle then struggled to breathe. He tried to scream but fell over through the table. It seemed he was having a heart attack. Everyone was shocked. Someone called the ambulance to take him to the hospital. However, he sadly passed away even before the ambulance arrived. My aunt received the bad news and she rushed to the hospital. She cried bitterly because she couldn't say goodbye to him for the last time. He was gone. In just 1 month, my uncle had lost nearly 20 kilograms before his passing, and his health seemed to be declining rapidly. My aunt suspected something was off and asked the doctor for an autopsy. When the results came back, she was shocked, for the cause of death could not be determined, nor could the doctor explain anything in a scientific way. My aunt was shunned by her husband's death. She suspected that his death was related to some evil deity. So she decided to go to the spiritual place in the forest to find out. When she arrived at the forest, following the instructions of a few people, she looked everywhere but couldn't find any statues or altars. It's been 3 long years since my uncle had died, yet his death still remains a mystery that has made my aunt and our family extremely heartbroken and sad. I heard this story a long time ago. At one company, workers often worked overtime and left very late to earn extra income. Near 9 o'clock in the evening, a young man named Carol had just finished his shift. Carol was offered a carpool by a colleague, but because the two were not on the same road, Carol refused and intended to take a bus to go home. The factory where the guys worked was in the suburbs, and the last bus back to the city left at 9:20 p.m. and arrived at the pickup station around 9:30 p.m. The young man thought he was in time to catch the bus, so when he got out of the factory, the other man drove back first. At this time, the young man looked at his watch. Unexpectedly, it was almost 9:30. Carol knew he could be late, so he rushed to the nearest bus stop. The bus stop was a few minutes by motorbike from the factory. He had to run at full speed to get to the station. When he got there, he was almost out of breath, panting. The young man looked at his watch once again, and a worried expression about afraid of not being on time. Unfortunately, the clock struck 9:40 p.m., meaning the last bus left the station more than 10 minutes ago. The way back to the city also became longer because it was difficult to catch a car here. Carol was disappointed. He had missed the last bus. He thought about having to take a taxi back to the city and worried about money. While Carol was thinking that, a bus arrived. When the bus arrived, Carol was overjoyed, thinking that the bus was late as he was. This might have been the only exception ever. It could also be considered as Carol's luck. The bus creaked to a stop in front of Carol. Because Carol often rode the bus at this hour, he recognized the familiar driver at a glance. What was strange was that there were so many people on the bus. Normally, at this time of day, only about 1 or 2 passengers would be there. This was even more crowded than usual. Only one person on the bus had been following Carol's every move since he got onto it. It was a middle-aged man whose expression changed when he saw Carol. Not paying any attention to this, Carol slowly found an empty seat near the back of the bus and sat down. The man was still staring at Carol and thinking about something. To avoid the angry look, Carol purposely turned his head toward the window and looked out. Unexpectedly, the man stood up and went straight to where Carol was sitting. He approached without a word, and a hostile look on his face, like Carol had done something wrong with him. Moments later, the man suddenly swung his fist and punched Carol's face. Unable to take it anymore, Carol angrily stood up and argued with the man. He wondered why he hit people like that. Carol didn't have time to say anything when the man ferociously grabbed him by the collar and wanted to drag him out of the bus because he was not pleasing to the eye. He didn't understand what was happening. He just wanted to push the man away, but he couldn't. He begged the people on the bus to help him. But none of the people on the bus would speak up, as if they could neither see Carol nor know what was happening on that bus. Then the man pulled Carol to the front of the bus while he was shouting that he needed to get out of the bus urgently. Despite Carol protesting, the man kept asking him to get off the bus. The driver did not say anything and motioned for the bus to stop. At this time, the bus door was also open. Immediately, the man pulled Carol out of the bus without once looking back at him. The bus door quickly slammed shut, and the bus continued to move. When the bus drove away, the middle-aged man let go of his hand and watched as the bus was slowly disappearing. Suddenly he sighed, his face drenched with sweat. He suddenly changed his expression and told Carol that he was scared to death just now. Carol froze in place, thinking the man was losing his mind, so he acted like that. This man saw a suspicious and confused look on Carol, so he told him that they were riding on a ghost bus. The man also recounted the process of getting on this bus. Once settled into position, he sensed that something was wrong. The first was that the people on the bus were all lifeless, not talking or breathing. He immediately looked around to examine the situation. The bad luck was that he discovered that all the passengers on the bus had no legs. Only then did he realize that they were not human at all. He was afraid to make a sound and didn't know what to do until he saw Carol getting onto the bus. He realized Carol was a real person
alive. So, he had to think of a way for both of them to get off of the bus. The man made it clear to Carol and told him to hurry home. Carol thought the man didn't look like a madman lying. By that time there were no more buses, so he decided to take a taxi to go home. When he got into the taxi, Carol and the driver accidentally heard the news broadcast on FM radio that the police had found a bus which jumped off the bridge and fell into the river at 4 p.m. The news reached his ears, sending chills down his spine. Soon after, information about the bus was made clear. All 9 passengers and the driver died. What was even more bizarre was that it was the same bus that Carol was on.
About 10 years ago, I went to a mountain village in the country as a trainee teacher after graduating from university. Although I had to go to a strange place, I was not alone because I also had a classmate with me. His name is Ben. The place we went to work was relatively backward. The school was a dilapidated 2-story house located on a mountain to the west of the village. Because the village was backward, living conditions were not good and there were no dormitories, so we lived in a free classroom on the first floor of the school. Since there was nothing to entertain us there, we usually went to bed very early. Every night, I took advantage of the bed sheets and blankets. The hardest part every night was that I had to go to the toilet before going to bed. After making the bed, I grabbed the flashlight and prepared to go out. At this time, my friend told me to be careful when walking because it was very dark around here. It was quite deserted around here, so I also felt a bit scared. I turned to ask Ben to go with me for fun, but Ben said that he was very sleepy. He also warned me one more thing, that in the village, it seemed that someone had just died. This thing scared me even more. It turned out that this guy was trying to scare me too. Ben told me that someone in this village was buried on the hill west of this school a few days ago. Hearing this, I didn't know why my friend was trying to scare me anymore. Regardless of what Ben said, I turned my head and took the flashlight to go outside. As soon as I went out, I saw that the surroundings were dark with no moonlight. Honestly, I was also a little worried. The toilet of the school was on the side of the road outside the school, nearly 100 meters from the school gate. There were no houses around the school, which was extremely deserted. But right now, in a hurry, I could only reassure myself and walk towards the gate. This place was different from the city. The night was extremely quiet. Not even a light was visible. I turned on my flashlight to find the way and finally reached the toilet. Although the toilets here were a bit run down and old-fashioned, it was always a great feeling to have the problem resolved promptly. After going to the toilet, when I stepped outside, I suddenly heard faint footsteps coming from somewhere. Hearing the movement, I thought Ben must have sneaked out quietly, hid outside the toilet and prepared to scare me. So I raised my voice, telling him that I had spotted him already. "You're gone, I've seen you!" But after I finished, something caught my attention. I immediately flashed my flashlight in the direction of the moving person. It was weird. 2 people showed up. So it was not Ben. I wondered why the 2 of them were walking at night at this time and they didn't even use flashlights. The strange thing was that the height of these 2 people in the dark was not like an adult, but like 2 12 or 13-year-old children. Suddenly they stopped and slowly turned back. I felt a little scared at the time. I gathered my courage and shone a flashlight at them. The scene that followed made me jump. I found the clothes of those 2 very strange. It was kind of red, blue and very bright. I thought that maybe it was the local costumes here. I was surprised and kept asking questions in my head. Only now did I notice half of their faces hidden in the shadows, especially the two red lips, which seemed very strange. And just a few seconds later, I was shocked by the terrifying scene before my eyes. The faces of these two suddenly became monstrous. They stared at me terribly. At this point, they looked very lifeless. I realized that they were two paper people with eerie smiles on their gloomy faces. They were staring at me. Paper. Paper people. My mouth stammered. My face stiffened. I looked extremely panicked. Terrified, I slipped and fell, dropping both the flashlight and the toilet paper in my hand. The two paper people were still standing, smiling weirdly and getting uglier and uglier. That smile completely haunted me. I used all my strength and ran away for life. As I ran, I shouted that there was a ghost. After running for a while, I turned around to see if they were chasing me. Under the light of the flashlight, they were still standing motionless and looking in my direction. Their faces began to become more monstrous, their smiles downright terrifying. Hearing my screams from afar, Ben rushed to the door and asked me what was wrong. I rushed in and shouted that there were ghosts. "Oh no! Paper people!" When Ben heard me talk about the paper people, he was also amazed. Not letting him continue to ask me, I quickly pushed him into the room. Immediately after, I closed the door and locked it. After closing the door, my back was against the door, my feet fell to the ground, and I started to gasp. Ben reassured me to stay calm and tell him everything. "Ben, I saw two ghosts!" At first, Ben thought I was pretending. But after he noticed that my whole body was shaking and my face was pale, he finally realized that something was wrong. Then he squatted down and hurriedly reassured me. Paper people! I saw two paper people. I slowed my breathing a bit and talked about what just happened to Ben. After listening to me, Ben was silent for a moment, then helped me to the bed to rest. But lying in bed, I couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned all night. My mind was filled with the bizarre scene. The following morning, the sun rose and warm rays were shining through the window. I woke Ben up and went to report this to the village secretary. At our insistence, the village secretary would find us a house in the village too. Although the new accommodation was worse than the school accommodation, it was in the village anyway, and I felt safer. Only later did I learn that a couple had died in the village a few days ago. The night I saw the two paper people were just 7 days after their death. At the time of burial, the family burned down 2 paper dolls. But that night, I saw 2 paper people walking on the street. I have no idea what happened. That was also the question I still hadn't found the answer to. This horrifying event occurred when I was young and studying in an old vocational school. I came from the countryside at that time, so I had to stay in the school's dormitory. I also had 2 other female friends, Lily and Anna, who came from another rural area to study and stayed in the same dormitory as me. Lily was very attractive and pursued by many people, whereas Anna was shy and had never mentioned love before. On the contrary, she was solely focused on her studies. Our dormitory was very cold and dark at night, because it was built more than 10 years ago. That was why Anna never wanted to do the bathroom alone. That night, I was falling asleep when I heard someone calling out to me and shaking me to wake me up. I slowly opened my eyes to see what was wrong. Anna was standing next to the bed, her face a little shy, but she wanted me to go to the bathroom with her. Because I was used to it, it didn't bother me, so I agreed right away. The two of us went to the bathroom together and didn't forget to tease her about how shy she was on the way. But in a trembling voice, she stated that this school had been haunted for a long time and that the ghost story was well known to everyone. I didn't believe in ghosts, so when I heard those words, I didn't pay much attention, even laughing at her that she had heard fake news and was scared for no reason. Then I walked away, returned to the bedroom as soon as possible. And Anna, after hearing what I said, seemed angry because I didn't believe what she said. So Anna chased after me. Her face became more serious, her voice no longer trembling, and she tried to tell me the story of the ghost in red who haunted this school. It was a female demon who committed suicide out of love, and thus couldn't flee. I was still not interested in this story, and when we arrived to the bathroom, I just told her to go quickly and return as soon as possible. But Anna was a coward. She didn't want me to wait outside. Instead, she told me to go inside and wait. Seeing Anna's fear, I had no choice but to go inside as she instructed and stood close to the wall to look over. This toilet was in desperate need of repair because it was too old. Suddenly, a gust of cold air blew from nowhere, causing my entire body to shiver uncontrollably. Obviously, this was a closed room, so how could there be such a breeze? So, I urged Anna to hurry up and return as soon as possible. When I turned to have a look at the toilet that Anna was using, I noticed something strange. It was the room next to Anna's that was also being used by another person. I wasn't sure when she was there, but Anna and I walked in and didn't notice her. What was odd was that she was wearing red high heels instead of slippers like the rest of us. It was after midnight, the dorms were closed. No one should dress up to go out at this time, and wearing high heels to the bathroom was unusual. Although I wasn't afraid of ghosts, seeing that scene made me nervous, so I knocked on Anna's door and continued to urge her. Anna's face was slightly irritated when she walked out as a result of my constant prodding. I didn't say much, just told her that I needed to get back to my room. Anna teased me at the time because she thought standing outside alone made me scared, while I dared to say I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I didn't dare to mention the strange woman next to Anna's room because I knew she was very cowardly, so I sneaked a glance to confirm once more if it was really human after all. But unexpectedly, the woman in red shoes vanished and the bathroom was deserted. I couldn't only reassure myself that I was mistaken because I had heard Anna's story and imagined it myself. After that, we returned to the bedroom and I decided not to tell Anna what I had seen. I quickly fell asleep, but no longer after my entire body went numb and it became difficult to breathe as if someone was pressing against me. The air became very cold. I heard the door being opened very loudly. A woman dressed in bright red dress with long black hair stood there. I panicked and took a close look at the woman. Her face was extremely frightening. Her wide mouth was full of blood, her eyes without pupils, only white, and her neck appeared to have been squeezed by something, leaving a fairly obvious mark. Her dress was ripped, but the scariest part was that she was wearing a pair of red high heels, the same ones I saw in the bathroom just before. She was also floating with her feet barely touching the ground. Apparently, she was the female demon Anna mentioned. She just hovered like that and came to Anna's bed. Anna suddenly sat up, not hearing any voice or movement from her. I could only see Anna sat up as if she was ordered to do so by the demon. Anna's eyes were lifeless, like a sleepwalker, and her skin had turned pale. Anna jumped out of bed and began walking slowly across my bed, right behind the female demon. Anna lowered her face, but her body continued to walk unconsciously. I was terrified, but I didn't want Anna to follow the demon, so I screamed and tried to stop her, but my mouth was glued shut. I couldn't open it, and my body was heavy and numb. So, I had no choice but to watch Anna follow the demon out of the room. I was dreaming when I was startled awake by a scream. When I awoke, I opened my eyes and saw that the room was lit, indicating that it was all a dream. Looking at the door, I noticed Lily and other girls from the other room gathered outside. It appeared that something had happened to Anna, because the roommate next door appeared very concerned. She said with a serious face and trembling voice, something happened to Anna, and she asked everyone to come to have a look. Anna was in the bathroom. I looked over at Anna's bed, and she was no longer there. I began to be concerned about my dream last night. We were all panicked and at the time rushed there to see Anna's situation. In my heart, I just hoped she didn't meet anything serious. Lily was the first to arrive, and I still didn't know what happened to Anna. When I heard Lily scream in fear, I was startled as well. I also rushed inside to watch as most heinous thing I could not bear happening right in front of my eyes. Anna was dead. She was sitting on the floor, her skin pale. Could it be that my dream from the previous night came true, and it was the female demon who killed her? Anna's eyes wide open but white, and her face no longer had bloodstains, and she died because she cut her own wrist. The blood was all over the floor and she must have been in great pain. Later, Anna's family members joined the procession to return Anna's body to her hometown. They also had a heated debate with the school, while the school claiming that Anna committed suicide out of love. But I knew Anna had never had a lover and would never do something so stupid. I couldn't get a good sleep after that night. When I recalled the scene on the day Anna died, I always got agitated. In a dream, I saw Anna standing next to the bed, jolting me awake. Seeing Anna again made me very happy, and despite the fact that she was dead, I felt no fear. However, Anna appeared to be in a hurry. She simply stated that I needed to go and immediately drew my hand out of bed. I looked down and saw that the cut on Anna's wrist was still open and that the blood was flowing. I began to panic because I remembered the demon in red, afraid that she would have transformed into Anna and seduced me the same way she had taken Anna away that night, so I struggled to fight back. Anna's face erupted in rage. She held and dashed towards me. She rushed to me, yelling that there was no time and that I must leave immediately. I awoke from my dream at the same time I heard Lily scream. We exchanged glances and discussed the previous dream. Strangely, Lily had the same dream as me. We believed that Anna wanted us to leave the building for a reason, so without a doubt we dashed to the door and fled as quickly as we could. As soon as we arrived on the ground floor, a plume of black smoke rose out from the floor. Lily and I were both terrified and had no idea what was going on. The fire broke out after a few minutes and spread to the other floors of the building. Fortunately, we could escape in time. Lily and I stood dumbfounded, looking up at our windows, where a figure stood, staring at us. It was Anna, looking at us through the windows with a happy smile on her face. It turned out that Anna was the one who saved us from the fire. Perhaps it was because this was the last thing she wanted to do for us that her smile was so satisfying. My elementary school teacher was a person who didn't believe in ghosts, but that year, something terrible happened that made him start to change his mind. The school I attended at the time was small in the village. In the past, the school was even more rickety and shabby, but then with donations from everyone, it was also more spacious. My teacher's name was Zhang. He was always busy and dedicated to his work. That day, he stayed at the office very late to prepare the outline for the following day. As soon as it was all over, he was able to relax his body and stretch his shoulders. Then suddenly he heard a noise coming from the window. It was like someone was walking back and forth in the schoolyard and throwing sand into the room. He listened to hear better, then noticed that the noise was getting louder and louder. The more he heard it, the more it sounded like someone was moving the sand outside. Thinking that there were still some boarding students playing outside at this hour, he slowly approached the door to have a look. Strangely, when he opened the door, there was no one outside. Everything was still extremely quiet. Muttering a few words, he went back inside. He thought partly because he heard it wrong or just normal wind. So he quickly sat down at the table to prepare to continue working. But as soon as he sat down on the chair, the same noise started again. This time the sound was louder than before. At this point, he thought that someone was trying to make fun of him, so he went quickly and opened the door with a few scolding sentences. But it was still like at first. Everything was extremely silent outside, not even wind. Even that day the weather was hotter than usual. This thing made him start to wonder and be confused. He closed the door to go inside, but thought about the sound in his mind. But being a person who did not believe in ghosts, he still did not think much. Then he continued to sit at the table and drafted the outline for the rest. The noise was again heard outside the courtyard, this time more clearly and longer than the previous two, but he chose not to care about it anymore. Whatever it was, just didn't care. So he sat at the table and finished all his work without going out to the yard to check it out. After the work was done, it was already past midnight. There would always be boarding rooms for teachers to stay at the school. Since it was late at night and he still had to get up early tomorrow, he decided to stay in the teacher's boarding room. He also forgot that the strange noise from outside was no longer heard. He thought that someone must have known he was late and wanted to scare him, but they stopped when they got bored. At this moment, cold air rushed in from the door, surprising him, so he quickly looked out. The window was still closed, but there was a figure outside the door. Because it was too dark, the face could not be seen clearly. It seemed to be a man. That man was standing close to the window and staring at Mr. Zhang. Too surprised because suddenly at this time a stranger was standing outside the door looking at him, Mr. Zhang immediately ran to the door, thinking that the man had been teasing him by pretending to be a ghost, so Mr. Zhang was very angry. However, when he opened the door and looked at the window, the man had disappeared from time to time. Seeing that, Zhang was also confused as to what was going on. He shouted to ask if anyone was here teasing him, but everything remained silent. At this moment he was also a little worried and felt strange. Maybe it was a ghost. Otherwise, how could it disappear so quickly? Besides, the school had never had strangers enter. But feeling that nothing happened, he quickly changed his clothes and went to bed because the following day was an important class. As soon as he lay down on the bed, Mr. Zhang began to hear the sound of sand pulling, footsteps and noise in the yard. It was louder and more chaotic than he first heard. Curious, he began to put his glasses on and listen carefully again, just afraid that he heard the wrong steps. And when he came up, there was no one like before. but the footsteps became louder and clearer. Certainly not by mistake. Mr. Zhang slowly got out of bed and put on his slippers. This time, he would be gentle, so that if someone teases, they would not be able to run in time. But when he looked out at the yard through the glass window, the things outside made him terrified. Many people were walking outside, or rather the whole yard was full of people. Suddenly in the middle of the yard, he didn't know the graves. How could it be grown so quickly? Countless graves appeared all over the schoolyard. Fearing that he might have misjudged his vision due to fatigue or because he was in a dream, he carefully took off his glasses and wiped them carefully to see again. This time, it was unmistakable. No one made fun of him at all. He must have met a ghost. The schoolyard was now littered with graves and monstrous people. Their gazes were contorted and their white eyes had no irises. Some people even looked like they had sores, which were very scary. Suddenly one of them discovered Mr. Zhang peeking from inside the room. That freaked him out. Mr. Zhang tried to cover his mouth and nose with both hands. He was afraid that even breathing lightly would be discovered by all those ghostly people. But it was too late. As soon as he covered his mouth, they also discovered him, so they turned all their attention to him. These people were so monstrous, even their heads were bent backwards as if broken. Their heads were hanging and looked terrible. After that, they gathered together and approached Mr. Zhang's room. More and more people flocked to the door of the room. They stood outside the glass door and looked inside. Only now could their faces be seen clearly. Some people had their entire faces destroyed. People had broken limbs. People had broken necks. People had blood all over their faces. The scene couldn't be more terrifying. Mr. Zhang was so scared that he fell backward. His legs were frozen, unable to move. They jostled and jostled each other, then pressed their faces to the glass as if they were watching something interesting, thinking they could rush into the room at any moment. Terrified, Mr. Zhang could only try and let out a scream when he passed out. What happened after that? Mr. Zhang didn't know anything anymore. The following morning, the other teachers came and found that Mr. Zhang had fainted on the ground, so they took him to the infirmary. He was finally able to wake up and still be at peace. After he calmed down, he also recounted everything that happened last night. After hearing the story, everyone suddenly remembered that this school was built on the land of a mass grave. There used to be a lot of strange things happening here. After that incident, the school invited a Feng Shui master to review the school, and the Feng Shui master proposed to build a large stone board in the middle of the schoolyard as a cover. And it worked. After building that stele, everything continued to go on as usual. No one was scared anymore. This was a story that happened to me and my wife a few years ago. At the time, to secure a source of income for both of us was extremely challenging. When I won a big project, my wife and I immediately rented a small apartment to stay in temporarily. But since moving into the apartment, my wife often had nightmares. In the middle of the night, she kept waking up from a nightmare that kept repeating night by night. Because of lack of sleep, my wife fell seriously ill. I was curious, so I asked my wife about the dream she so often dealt with every night. My wife honestly recounted that every night she would see herself being chased by a group of people in the alleyway leading to an apartment complex. The road was dark, she couldn't see her surroundings clearly, and the air was extremely cold. My wife tried everything to be able to escape the strange pursuit but could not get away. This group of people were very large. Their movements were also extremely agile. They were only a few feet away from our wife. Every time my wife turned her head to look, she saw a group of people with white eyes, black faces and sharp fangs chasing her as if trying to catch her, and always while having sinister smiles. They chased my wife into a large but old and dilapidated building. My wife felt this building had a familiarity since it looked like the building that my wife and I were renting, but the atmosphere was unusually cold and gloomy. Despite the chill that gnawed at her skin, my wife ran a long way to the middle of the building. She continued to run for a while when she hit a dead end. She had no choice but to hide behind a large plasterboard to distract the mysterious people. By the time the group of people could come, my wife was already hiding. Taking advantage of the time they were still busy looking for her, my wife slowly turned around, stepping out of the plaster wall to find a way of escaping. Hearing the footsteps, this group of people turned to look in that direction, seeing my wife escaping and then immediately chased after her. The sound of human footsteps echoed throughout the building with my wife's gasps and screams for help. My wife kept running and eventually found an abandoned room in a corner which was pitch black with no sight of what was inside, looking both mysterious and dangerous. My wife struggled to look around, wanting to find herself some light glimmering in this dark space, but she didn't know which way to go. Seeing that the group of people was about to catch up with her, she took a risk and entered the room to hide. My wife huddled in the dark room. Her whole body trembled from fear and the cold air inside. She only knew how to hold her breath and pray for the group of people not to find her. Suddenly, at that moment, behind my wife came the sound of footsteps rushing towards her. After a while, the group of people also found my wife. They immediately looked inside and looked at my wife, causing my wife to panic, jumping all over her and screaming. They rushed to each other, surrounding my wife. They reached out their hands as if to grab my wife and take her away. My wife was very scared, trying to find a way to escape, but now she couldn't move anymore. My wife's whole body paused as if frozen. She could only raise her hand to cover her face and scream for help, but got no response. She finally woke up. Since then, my wife's health had deteriorated. She often fell ill. But even so, she still tried to take good care of me so that I didn't have to worry too much. I had to go to the construction site early every day to start work. The first stage was to dig the ground layer to start building the foundation, so the work was hard. As a deputy manager, I had a lot of work to do. I had to supervise the work progress of the workers here on behalf of my superiors. The workers here worked extremely hard to be able to hand over the project on time. I often stood outside and constantly urged workers at the construction site to work harder and faster. The atmosphere here was extremely tense. While the workers were busy digging up the ground, I walked around the workplace alone. Unknowingly, I saw a small snake being covered by a layer of ground all over its body. It looked so pitiful. I immediately ordered the excavator to stop working and find a tree branch on the side of the road to help this little snake out. I let the snake wrap itself around the branch and gently carried it to a safer place. I found a long lawn lying on the side of the construction site. I felt that the place was also quite stable, so I released the small snake. I stood still by the grass, watching the small snake creeping through the weeds and disappearing into the deep forest as I breathed a sigh of relief. After successfully rescuing the poor little snake, I immediately told the workers to continue their work, not forgetting to instruct them to stay aware, in order to avoid the same case as the small snake. Finally, I happily returned to the worksite. For some reason, after releasing the snake back to its wildlife, I felt extremely relieved. That afternoon, I was also able to get home from work early. I had dinner with my wife happily. My wife's body had also reduced her fever a lot. That night, my wife also slept better than usual. But in the middle of the night, my wife was once again shocked awake. Her face was tired and haunted, not the horror like the previous days, making me extremely surprised. My wife said that she continued to have the same nightmare as usual. But this time, in the dream appeared a strange thing that helped her escape the pursuit of the mysterious people pursuing her. My wife saw that the mysterious group of people continued to chase her down the familiar dark corridor. This time she got used to the ways here, so she quickly found the old room to hide in once again. Like the previous nights, these people once again found her hiding in the room. They rushed in again as if to pull her out and take her away. These people had become more aggressive than before. They pressed her to the end, they climbed through the window and entered the room to capture her. She screamed in panic for a while when a huge shadow appeared, biting at the people here like a monster. It wasn't until this huge creature came in front of the room that my wife could see it clearly. It was a big, yellow snake that acted very aggressively. This huge snake tried to protect my wife. It consumed all those monstrous ghosts with one bite and swallowed them whole. These people, some of them who were wrapped tightly by the snake's tail, were eaten alive, looking horrific. In the blink of an eye, these monstrous ghosts had completely disappeared. After consuming all the ghosts, the huge snake appeared in front of my wife. It looked at her gently, moved its head to signal peacefully to her, then turned to the other way. My wife also inadvertently understood the meaning of the huge snake. She followed the snake to find her way back. When my wife got out of the building, she saw an empty lot. The houses here had been abandoned for a long time, ruined and very lonely. After bringing my wife to a safe place, the snake turned into nearby wild grass and then slithered through the grass, gradually disappearing. After a while, a white light appeared, shining directly on my wife's face, causing her to wake up. After listening to my wife's story, according to her description, I realized that the snake that saved her life was the little snake that I saved at the construction site. I reassured my wife with a few sentences and then told her the story about the snake I saved at work. My story made her breathe a sigh of relief. Since then, my wife had not had that strange nightmare anymore. My project was also executed smoothly and way faster than planned.